In September of 2021, in a Manhattan office, a 28-year-old woman signs a piece of paper that makes her rich. Her name is Charlie Javice. She has just sold her company to the largest bank in the United States for $175 million. JPMorgan Chase gives her a managing director title, a desk, and a $20 million bonus just for staying. Her company is called Frank. She picked that name, she once explained, because Frank means honest. And here is the thing that makes this story worth 20 minutes of your life. Frank was a real company, solving a real problem. In America, if you want federal money for college, you have to fill in a form called the FAFSA. The form is free, and it is brutal. It is so long and so confusing that every single year, students who qualify for help never finish it and never get the money. Frank promised to cut that down to minutes. And people came. Over 35 million people visited Frank's website. That number is real. It is in the court filings. What Charlie Javice told JP Morgan was that 4.25 million of those people had handed Frank their name, their email, and their phone number. The real figure was around 300,000. Now, before you decide that a bank got lazy, listen to what JP Morgan actually did. They asked for the number, they asked for the list. They put the exact data fields they wanted in writing, and said in an email that this was a condition of closing the deal. And they hired an independent firm to verify it. They did all of that, and they still handed over $175 million. This is the story of how that happened, and of the 4 separate documents that told the truth, in writing, while it was happening. Charlie Javice was born in 1993, and she grew up with 2 passports and a good address. Westchester County, just north of New York City. Her father worked at a hedge fund. Her mother had been a teacher and later worked as a life coach. She went to the French-American School of New York, and according to Forbes, she was the kind of student who was already building things before anyone asked her to. At 17, still in high school, she started her first company. It was called Pover Up. The idea came to her, she said, in 10th grade, while she was teaching English in Thailand and Myanmar. Pover Up was going to be an online platform where students could learn about microfinance and start their own clubs, and in doing so, chip away at global poverty. She wrote the business plan in her junior year of high school. She went alone to a microfinance event in Manhattan, at an age when most people are worried about their driving test, and held her own in a room full of executives. A New York attorney she met there helped her incorporate the company while she was still a minor. By 2011, in her second year at Wharton, Fast Company put her on its list of the 100 most creative people in business. She came in at number 99. She was 18 years old. She appeared on CNBC. And Pover Up never worked. The same attorney who helped her set it up later described it to Forbes as, quote, a very grandiose idea that didn't really get that far off the ground. Now, plenty of teenage companies go nowhere. That is not the interesting part. The interesting part is what she started saying about herself. Javice told people she had been selected for a Thiel Fellowship, the famous grant that pays young founders to drop out of university, and that she had turned it down. The co-founder of the fund that runs it told Forbes flatly that this never happened. His words, she was never offered a fellowship, and it bothers me that she is going around saying that. Hold on to that because it is more than a decade before the fraud, and it is the same move. Take something that is almost true and round it up to something that sounds better. She graduated from Wharton in 2013, in 3 years instead of 4, in finance and law. That same year, she incorporated a company in Delaware called Tapped, and then came 2 failures nobody remembers. In 2015, Tapped was a job search product. In 2016, she pivoted to building an alternative credit scoring system, ran straight into financial regulation, and fired almost her entire staff. It was only in 2017 that Tapped started doing business under a new name, Frank, and this time it worked because this time the problem was real. Money followed fast, $5.5 million in March of 2017, $10 million more in December, in a round led by Mark Rowan, the billionaire chief executive of Apollo Global Management. Another $5 million in April of 2020, with the education company Chegg joining in. Around $20.5 million in total. And people who were in the room in those early years have described a pattern to reporters. Early investors say Javice was already quoting them thousands of signed-up students before there was a product for them to sign up to. When someone pushed back, according to Forbes, the answer was always some version of, "These old people don't understand this is how it works. You fake it till you make it." One person says they told her directly that she was messing with people's lives. There were formal warnings too, and they are a matter of public record. In 2017, her co-founder sued the company in Israel over unpaid wages, and a Tel Aviv court ordered Frank to pay him $35,000. That same year, the U.S. Department of Education accused Frank of potentially misleading students about whether it was connected to the government. It was settled in 2018, and Frank had to change its website. Then in 2020, the Federal Trade Commission sent Frank a warning letter about deceptive practices, saying that Frank was creating false hope and confusion for students. And in 2019, in between those two regulatory warnings, Forbes put Charlie Javice on its 30 under 30 list. Every single thing I have just told you happened before JPMorgan ever heard her name. It was published. It was searchable. Nobody on either side of a $175 million negotiation went looking for it. Everything from here comes from the Securities and Exchange Commission's complaint filed in April of 2023. 23 pages of dates, emails, and messages that almost nobody covering this case has read. It starts in January of 2021, when Frank hires an investment bank to find it a buyer. There is a clause in that agreement worth pausing on. Frank agrees that it is solely responsible for the accuracy and completeness of the sales materials, and that they will not contain any untrue statement of a material fact. Javice read that agreement and approved it. By May, a first bank is at the table. Javice shows them a deck that says, 4.25 million Frank students and growing. That bank walks away for its own reasons. But notice what just happened. The number had already been road tested on someone else. In early July, a Frank board member calls JPMorgan. The timing is perfect, because JPMorgan wants a bigger share of student customers, and Frank appears to be sitting on 4 million of them. The pitch deck they receive repeats the 4.25 million figure on 6 separate slides. On the 6th of July, Frank opens its data room. Inside is a spreadsheet with a column headed FAFSA in process, showing 4,265,085 customers. On the 12th and 13th of July, JPMorgan's people fly in for 2 all-day meetings in Manhattan. Javice takes almost every question herself, and in those rooms, she does something that will destroy her at trial 4 years later. She defines her terms. A user, she explains, is not a visitor. Frank has more than 35 million visitors. A user is someone who opened an account and gave Frank 4 specific things: first name, last name, email address, and phone number. And Frank, she says, has 4.25 million of those. She was precise about the definition and false about the number. 2 days later, JPMorgan puts $175 million on the table, subject to confirming what it has been told. Frank grants the bank 14 days of exclusivity. And then JPMorgan asks the obvious question: can we see the list? Javice does not say no. She does something much smarter. She raises privacy. She says she cannot hand over students' personal information to a third party. It is the perfect excuse, because it sounds responsible. JPMorgan insists. On the 1st of August, a JPMorgan employee sends an email that is, honestly, exactly the right email. How many customer accounts have 100% of the following data, it asks, and then lists them: first name, last name, date of birth, phone number, mailing address, email address. How many accounts have partial information, and of those, what percentage includes each field? Later the same day, the bank underlines that these are critical confirmatory diligence requests and conditions of closing the transaction. So the bank asked correctly in writing and made it a condition of the deal. Now watch what happens on Frank's side of that email. That same day, Javice forwards her head of engineering and her chief growth officer the spreadsheet with the 4.265 million visitors on it. It has demographics, where these people live, what degrees they are interested in. What it does not have is names, emails, or phone numbers, because those people were never customers, they were traffic. The next morning, Javice sends her director of engineering a link to a website that explains how to generate synthetic data that resembles real data in its statistics and demographics. Then the 3 of them get on a video call, and the request is put to the engineer plainly. take the 4.265 million visitors and manufacture names, email addresses, and phone numbers for them, matching the demographics of the real ones. The engineer is uncomfortable. He is worried this fake data might end up being used to attract investors. So he asks whether creating it is legal. And Javice tells him it is, and says that nobody is going to end up in orange jumpsuits. That line has been quoted everywhere, usually as a threat. It was not a threat. Read it in the filing and it is the opposite. She is reassuring him. Don't worry, nobody's going to prison over this. The engineer refuses. And then he does something better than refusing. He goes and gets the real number, and he sends it to her. He tells her the data shows 142,000 people who have at least started an application. Javice tells him to also count the users who don't have an application at all. And he writes back, if I count users with no FAFSA applications, we get approximately 293,192 records. Javice replies with one word. Exactly. That is the moment. Not the fake data, not the sale, this. From that message onward, Charlie Javice has the true number in writing, sent by her own employee, and she does not stop. She goes outside the company instead. The same day, she contacts a data science professor at a local university, a man she had met in college. On the 3rd of August, she gives him the real list of fewer than 300,000 users and hires him to generate 4.265 million names, addresses, emails, and birthdays. And the messages between them are not the messages of someone who is confused about what she is doing. They agree to sample first names and last names separately, and to make sure none of the resulting names belong to a real person. The addresses will be fake, but the street names should at least exist in the right state. And at one point, the professor warns her, in writing, that because so many of these invented students appear to live, attend high school and attend university in the same town, it would look fishy if someone were to audit it. That is document number 2 that told the truth. Then he says he cannot make convincing email addresses, and Javice suggests replacing them with a unique ID. Now, unique ID are a real and respectable thing. When a company shares sensitive records, it swaps the private field for a random string so the real data stays protected. She is proposing to use that convention to make invented data look like protected data. On the 4th of August, she sends the professor the draft validation report that his numbers, quote, would need to make sure matches. That report was already filled in. It already said 4,265,085 unique accounts, each with a first name, last name, email address, and phone number. She sent him the answer sheet before the exam. The next day, he delivers exactly that number of accounts, and she tells him to send it straight to the independent validator. And this is the part I want you to sit with. The validator did its job and sent its report the same day. It confirmed that the fields were populated versus null or blank. Populated versus blank. 100% of those 4.265 million rows had something in the name field, something in the email field, something in the phone field. The validator never said those people existed. It said the boxes were not empty. $175 million rested on that sentence. Javice authorizes the report to go to JPMorgan, but asks the validator not to share any additional background with the bank. Then she asks them to delete the data, and then she pays the professor. He invoices her for $13,300, itemizing the work he did creating synthetic data. She tells him to send it again for $18,000 as a bonus, and to make the new invoice a single line item that just says, data analysis. 3 days later, the merger agreement is signed. Let's stop the story here, because 3 things need explaining before the rest makes sense. The first is what she was actually selling. The FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. The word free is in the name, and it matters. It is the form American students fill in to get federal grants and loans for college. It is long, it asks about your parents' finances, and every year a meaningful number of students who qualify for money simply give up partway through. That gap is real, and a business that closes it would be genuinely valuable. Frank said it could do the form in a fraction of the time, although even that claim had cracks in it. A financial aid expert who examined the tool told Forbes that Frank skipped questions that actually determine how much aid you get, and that the completion times it advertised were, in his words, not exactly true. The second thing to explain is why a bank would pay $175 million for a list of students. JPMorgan was not buying a website. It was buying contact with young people at the exact moment their financial life begins. First bank account, first card, first loan, first mortgage eventually. A customer you win at 19 might stay for 40 years, which is why banks will pay absurd money for access to that age group. And you can see that logic written into Javice's own employment contract. She signed it on the 4th of August, 2021, the same week the fake list was being built. It says that her performance in the new job would be measured on expanding Frank's engaged customer base of 4.25 million households to more than 10 million households over 3 years. She was hired to grow a number that did not exist. The third thing is the one most coverage of this case gets wrong. Synthetic data is not a crime. It is a normal, useful, widely used technique. A hospital that wants to test a new record system will generate a population of patients who do not exist, with the same age and illness distribution as its real ones, so that engineers can test the software without ever touching a real person's medical history. Banks do it, researchers do it. It is often the responsible choice. So the professor was not asked to do something exotic. He was asked to do something ordinary. The crime was not in the technique. It was in what the data was for. Synthetic records become fraud at the exact moment you hand them to somebody who is paying you for real people. And that distinction is the whole case, because it is also her defense. Everything she did had a legitimate-sounding version. Privacy concerns, synthetic data, unique ID, buying market data. Every step could be explained. What could not be explained was the order in which she did them. Because there is a third document that tells the truth, and it arrives right about here. The list of 4.5 million real students she goes out and buys to cover all this up does not come with a single phone number. And the phone number was one of the 4 fields she had personally defined in that Manhattan conference room in July. Here is the problem Charlie Javice now has. The fake list got her past the validator. But once the deal closes, JPMorgan owns the company. And JPMorgan will eventually ask to see the customers it just bought. And the professor's list evaporates the moment anyone tries to email one of those people. So she and her chief growth officer, Olivier Ammer, decide to buy real students instead. Not Frank's students, anyone's. On the 2nd of August, the same day the engineer refused, Ammer is already emailing a data broker. This is a company that sells marketing lists and advertises itself as having the most comprehensive and accurate data on high school students, college students, and young adults available anywhere. He asks what it would cost to buy their list of students currently in college. On the 6th of August, Javice approves the payment, $105,000 for 4.5 million students. And I want to put that number next to the other one, because this is the shape of the whole story. JPMorgan paid $175 million for a customer list. Charlie Javice bought a bigger customer list on the open market for $105,000. That is roughly 1/1600th of the price. Anyone at that bank could have done the same thing on a Tuesday afternoon with a corporate card. But the bought list has holes. The broker can only supply email addresses for fewer than 3 million of the 4.5 million students, and no phone numbers at all. So that same day, Javice texts the professor again. Weird question, she writes. If I have names, emails, and physical addresses for contacts, can we augment the data with phone numbers from a white pages database? He agrees to look into it. On the 10th of August, he approaches a second company, a public records aggregator, and on Javice's instruction tells them the data is needed to enrich contacts. On the 23rd, he sends over the purchased student list and asks them to match phone numbers and emails to it. It works about as well as you would expect. The second broker finds email addresses for less than half the students. And on the 29th of August, Javice gives an instruction that tells you exactly how far past the line she is. She tells the broker to search on address alone, meaning give me the email address of anyone living at that address, whether it is the student or not. If you cannot find the 19-year-old, give me their father. The complaint has a name for what came back: household email data. It worked in the sense that it produced more rows. On the 9th of September, the broker delivers around 1.9 million email addresses to cover 4.5 million student records. Frank pays $75,000 for it. So here is the inventory, in the SEC's own words. They now had a list of about 4.5 million students with identifying information. And because Frank had only ever attracted about 300,000 people who gave it their details, few if any of the names on that list had ever had any contact with Frank at all. On the 14th of September, 2021, the deal closes and the money moves. $9.7 million goes directly to her. $4.7 million into an irrevocable trust she set up that month, and $7 million into a second one. A third trust was set to receive $7.1 million more, which got frozen in escrow and never reached her. Over $21 million in total for her stake, with a $20 million retention bonus on top of it. Before her 30th birthday, she buys a condominium in Miami for $1.4 million, financed, according to Forbes, with a mortgage from JPMorgan. And then for 4 months, nothing happens. She is a managing director at the biggest bank in America, working on the product she built. Until January of 2022, when JPMorgan's marketing team decides it is time to do the thing they bought the company for. On the 6th of January, they ask for the customer data. On the 21st, Javice tells a Frank engineer to send marketing the list Amber bought from the broker. He does it, and afterwards, in an internal email to his own colleagues, he admits that he is not sure about the source of the data he just handed over. In early February, Javice sends the marketing team an upgraded version herself, combining both purchases, household emails, and all. She tells nobody at JPMorgan that any of it came from anywhere other than Frank. In July of 2022, JPMorgan's marketing team runs a test. They take a sample of 400,000 names from the list they have been given. They write an email offering JPMorgan financial products to what they believe are Frank's users. And they press send. 28% of those emails reached a working email address. Of the ones that arrived, 1.1% were opened. Both numbers, the SEC notes dryly, were far below what JPMorgan normally sees. Run those percentages, and you get the real scale of it. 400,000 emails sent, around 112,000 delivered. Somewhere near 1,200 human beings opened it. That is what $175 million bought. And that is what broke the case open. Not a regulator, not a journalist, not a whistleblower. A marketing campaign with a bad open rate. Somebody at JPMorgan looked at a dashboard, saw a number that made no sense and asked why. And here the story turns genuinely ironic. JPMorgan was able to investigate because JPMorgan had bought the evidence. When you acquire a company, you acquire its email accounts and its files. Frank's historic data had transferred to the bank as part of the merger. So when the bank went looking for why its campaign had failed, it found, sitting on its own servers, Charlie Javice's conversations with the data science professor about generating synthetic data. And it found the purchased broker list. The bank's conclusion was that Frank had never had 4.25 million legitimate users, and that there had been a months-long scheme to fabricate the data. It had paid $175 million to acquire. What followed has a detail in it that is almost too good. On the 22nd of December, 2022, JPMorgan sued Charlie Javice. That lawsuit landed 2 days after she had sued JPMorgan. She was suing the bank to make it pay her legal fees. And she won that one. A Delaware court ruled that under the terms of her employment, JPMorgan was legally obliged to advance her defense costs. So for a period, the bank that had been defrauded of $175 million was paying the lawyers defending the woman who did it. In January of 2023, Jamie Dimon, the chief executive of JPMorgan, was asked about the acquisition in public. He called it a huge mistake and said he would explain the lessons learned when it was out of litigation. That same month, JPMorgan shut the Frank website down. And on the 4th of April, 2023, 2 things happened on the same day. The Securities and Exchange Commission filed the civil complaint that this video is largely built on. And federal prosecutors in New York charged her criminally. She was arrested in New Jersey. The trial ran for 6 weeks in March of 2025. Charlie Javice and Olivier Amber were tried together. Mark Rowan, the billionaire who had led her $10 million funding round, appeared as the first witness for her defense, and later wrote to the judge asking for leniency. The jury took 8 hours across 2 days. Both defendants were convicted of conspiracy, wire fraud, bank fraud, and securities fraud. On the 29th of September, 2025, Judge Alvin Hellerstein sentenced her. 85 months in prison, 3 years of supervised release, a forfeiture order of $22,360,977.48, and restitution of $287,501,078. Prosecutors had asked for 12 years. In the courtroom, she said she would spend her entire life regretting these errors and asked for forgiveness. The judge told her that her words were very moving and that he did not think she would commit other crimes. And then he said, but others have to be deterred. In November, Amer was sentenced to 68 months. So put yourself on the other side of this for a second. You are JPMorgan. You did the things you are supposed to do. You asked how many customers, you asked for the list. You wrote out the 6 data fields you wanted in an email. You said in writing it was a condition of closing. You paid an independent firm to verify it. And you still lost $175 million because not one person in that process stopped to ask what the verifier was actually verifying. The answer was in the report the whole time. Populated versus null or blank. Nobody checked that the people were real because everybody assumed somebody else had. And she had the true number. Her own engineer typed it out and sent it to her. 293,192. She replied exactly. 4 days later, there was a list of 4,265,085 people who did not exist. Which leaves the question I cannot answer. Where exactly is the line? Because it clearly was not crossed on the 2nd of August, 2021. It had been getting crossed for a decade. The fellowship she said she turned down. The users she quoted before there was a product, fake it till you make it. Every founder alive sells the company they intend to become rather than the one they are. That is half the job. So at what point does describing the company you are about to be turn into fraud? Is it the first invented number, or is it the first one big enough to matter? Maybe she genuinely believed she would get to 4 million users and was just arriving early. Maybe it was greed from the start. I don't think we get to know. So tell me where you would draw that line in the comments. Thanks for watching. This has been Fortune Forensics, and I'll see you on the next one.